Good morning. My name is Reverend Jim Coakley, and I am so happy to join you this morning. This is a sermon called Love in the Time of Corona, and it's based on a book called The Leading Causes of Life by Gary Gunderson and Larry Prey. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the cover of the book as I'm speaking here for a moment. In 2009, when this book was published, the primary author, Gary Gunderson, was the Senior Vice President for Health and Welfare and the Director of the Center of Excellence in Faith and Health of Methodist Le Healthcare in Memphis. He was also on the faculty of the Rollins School of Public Health of Emory University in Atlanta. And Gunderson says in the beginning, the foreword of the book, that he was at a conference, a medical conference, and he was following a speaker who did an excellent job of laying out all the leading causes of death in society, particularly racism and poverty. And he felt like, how could I go to the podium and top that? Nor did he even want to. And in that split second, he decided he was never going to be talking about death again. He'd rather be talking about the leading causes of life. And he calls it 5 fundamentals to change the way you live your life. So those 5 fundamental concepts are the foundation of this book and also the foundation of my sermon. So I'd like to share them with you one at a time, starting with a Hebrew scripture reference to get you grounded before I launch into my sermon. So with that, I'll go from slide to slide and share them. The first is from Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19. Choose life. I have set before you life and death, blessings and cursings. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live. In this passage from Deuteronomy, Moses is reminding his listeners that the God of their ancestors has chosen them to be a blessing to the earth, and therefore they should in turn choose to live into that blessing. The first fundamental cause of life, connection. Gunderson says, connections are like the breath of air on which our very lives depend. Coherence. Simply put, coherence is a sense that life makes sense, that what happens is at least somewhat comprehensible as a whole, that even in dire and horrible circumstances, kindness and love can find a way. Agency. In this context, agency means we have the power to choose, to grow. It asks, what am I called to do with my life at this time? Blessing. Blessings have an unpredictable and even ferocious power to change the way we envision life and ourselves. And finally, the 5th fundamental cause of life is hope. Hope alone cannot change the way things are, but it can empower us to rise above. Love in the time of Corona. My apologies to the Gabriel Garcia Marquez fans out there, but I couldn't help twist the title of his 1985 bestseller, Love in the Time of Cholera. So if you tuned in this morning hoping to hear the tale of some steamy love story in an exotic country, I'm afraid I'm going to greatly disappoint you. But if you want to hear about how we can make sense of this pandemic we find ourselves in, and demonstrate the best of humanity, love, you're in luck. Well, frankly, we don't even need Marquez's fantastical novel because our real life right now is so unbelievable. Who would have thought we would have a virus that spread throughout the globe in a matter of months that has sickened millions of people and caused hundreds of thousands of deaths in the United States, and it hasn't even peaked yet? Who would have thought we'd have much of the world economy shut down because we're all quarantined? Who would have thought the stock market would drop at an unprecedented rate and that unemployment would skyrocket to record levels in 1 week? Who would have thought that our medical system would not be able to handle anything that came its way? We're so used to that. Who would have thought so many stories of death by the hundreds in a single day would appear, and they're not caused by a war? Who would have thought that falsehood and lies would become the public relations of the government? And who would have thought we would so suddenly be thrust into this virtual world we could have only imagined in science fiction? No, we don't need a novel when we have this real life. How can we make sense of it? How can we keep from feeling hopeless? A choice, Gunderson would say, is to choose life. Like the Israelites in the Hebrew scripture of Deuteronomy, who were just on the cusp of entering what they perceived as a new land of opportunity, the authors of our book today believe all of history has inflection points. Inflection points are those key points in history in which societies had to make a choice to survive. They had to choose life. And I have another slide that really brings it home to help you all understand it. This is sourced from Jonas Salk in a book called The Survival of the Wisest from Harper and Row in 1973. And so it's saying that all of history is a series of S-curves. And then there's this discontinuity opportunity that this is trying to portray. So if you think about the left-hand side of the curve and as it's coming up, it's supposed to suggest a time of abundance, a time where everything's going right. So however a society would measure itself, it could be wealth, it could be peace, it could be anything. But anyway, things are going positive because they figured it out. Then they reach in their history a point of inflection. And these could be things like the fall of the Roman Empire. It could be the discovery of iron. It could be the end of the Middle Ages. It could be the Reformation. It could be the Industrial Revolution. Any of those things where something significantly changed and caused our society to have a point of inflection at which everyone had to reconsider how things have been done in the past. So either systems had to change completely or just mindsets had to change. And as you can see in the graph, there's alternative futures that are portrayed. When a society chooses to change in a way that chooses life, it continues on this S-curve and increases. It continues to increase, although it eventually flattens out and begins a new S-curve. But if the society refuses to change, for example, you would probably be the lowest arrow in this curve and probably be a society that was headed towards decline. And we know of a number of societies today that are extinct. Then there's in between. Maybe you made choices, maybe you changed a little bit, and you did continue to survive, but you weren't optimized. And so it just depicts alternative futures that could be happening. The authors would say that we are on one of these inflection points and have been approaching it for centuries, probably since the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution has helped foster overpopulation and resource overuse to the point where we now have global environmental degradation, global climate change, and global pandemics. So with those concepts in mind, let me talk a little bit more about the choices that I already showed you earlier. Per the reading, Gunderson says we can choose death or life. Death, he would define as social decline, confusion, separation. And life, on the other hand, is world community, focused on sustainable, life-enhancing behavior. I'm going to unpack each of those causes of life that I shared with you earlier, one at a time. Connection. Are you choosing to connect, or are you retreating? Connecting to others, connecting to life. I acknowledge that there are many reasons people legitimately choose to disconnect with some people. Maybe you were in an abusive relationship, or just being with someone is very harmful. There are people who are have a lot of discomfort or shy connecting to other people. Or perhaps you've tried connecting in the past with the people around you and it's just some bad experience. I understand that. But as I said earlier, the author said connections are like a breath of air on which our lives depend. Brene Brown would say human beings are hardwired for connection. Individual connection to those closest to us, for example, family, friends, or our chosen family. Individual connection to like-minded others where we find acceptance and belonging, like our fellowships. Individual connection to the community in all the ways we can help volunteer and be a part of the community. And then, of course, communities connecting to each other, city by city, state to state, country to country. Unfortunately, the current trend in the mindset of that trend flies in the face of the need for connection. The ultra-right populist sentiment, which is choosing governments around the world right now, is the opposite of connection. It's every country for itself. Historical systems of cooperation are being dismantled and breaking down, and dominant group assertiveness has created dangerous and disastrous environments for the historically marginalized, who are becoming more and more disconnected. Unitarian Universalists have always been leaders in fostering connection. We may not always get it right. We've made mistakes in the past, but our hearts, I believe, have always been in the right place. We covenant to affirm and promote our sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. That's how we see connection. The second leading cause of life is coherence. So this is all about that life isn't really just random. We're not punished by angry gods as our distant ancestors would have thought, or seduced by the devil when bad things happen. Unitarian Universalists have a very rational faith. Now, we might use a lot of metaphors. One of them that I've heard a lot lately was that Mother Earth has become increasingly more toxic, and therefore the development of more toxic viruses seems quite plausible. Even if that metaphor doesn't speak to you, I think we all believe in evolution, that all species must be adaptive to change or they die. Well, with that in mind, viruses and humans are constantly adaptive. It's always been this way. COVID-19 is just the most recent example. It's just grown into a global pandemic because of changes in human behavior, overpopulation, and the ease of travel, which perhaps we could label the overuse of resources. Gunderson would say that when faced with a worldwide pandemic, which doesn't yet seem to be contained, we don't blame other cultures. We don't view it as a plague of divine retribution. We don't sow misinformation and hate. Instead, coherence is a sense that life makes sense, that what happens is at least somewhat comprehensible as a whole, and that even in dire and horrible circumstances, kindness and love can find a way. I think when I thought of this concept of coherence, I thought of a writing that I knew as a song, a choral piece, called I Believe. And this short little poem, essentially, is attributed anonymously to someone who lived in a concentration camp in Germany, and it was carved into the wall. I believe. I believe in the sun, even though it's not shining. I believe in love, even though I feel it not. I believe in God, or Spirit of life, even though he is silent. It's a beautiful poem. Even in the midst of the worst Holocaust in modern times, the author chose life. The author chose to believe in coherence, that kindness and love in the Spirit of life, or God, would find a way ultimately. The third leading cause of life is agency. And the quote was, "It means we have the power to choose to grow." Gunderson says that belief in agency asks us three questions. What am I to do with my life? What have I been called to do? And then, am I doing it? So I ask the question, how are you choosing to act in this crisis? Do you believe following the quarantine guidelines can help save lives? And do you choose to follow them as best you can? Or have you literally chosen death by ignoring them? Do you believe the troubled course of the world can be altered and therefore restored back to a sustainable and life-giving system? Or are you a hoarder, a prepper, a paranoid who believes the conspiracy theories that the world is about to be deliberately wiped out and you are helpless to do anything about it? Is your sole purpose in life to make sure you and your kin survive after billions are wiped out? Well, Unitarian Universalists have always believed in agency. We always believe we have agency. We don't depend on an outside or supernatural force to intervene in history. We feel empowered to act and believe we can make a difference, even in our smallest little part of the universe. This, my friends, is the core of our eternal optimism. I would say it's the essence of Unitarian Universalist salvation. We are a people of this world, not the next. The fourth leading cause of life is blessing. And the quote was, "Blessings have an unpredictable and even ferocious power to change the way we envision life and ourselves." So blessings, in Gunderson's context, take a little bit more to unpack and describe. Gunderson is talking about blessings across generations, or channels of blessings. So sort of from the ancestors to us here today listening to this, to the future generations. Gunderson's term for this is intergenerativity, which he says is probably not an English word, but if you go to some of the African languages where they very much believe in this form of blessing, you probably can find a word that is that. Intergenerativity, the flow between generations that sustains the life of us all now and those to come. The trick is to see the energy in this kind of blessing to counter the fear that is naturally stimulated in our culture. In our, quote, now culture, we seem to think we know everything there is to know and act as if the ancestors and their wisdom is completely irrelevant. Of course, our overuse of resources clearly demonstrates we don't plan to bless the future generations either. We're leaving them nothing. Unitarian Universalists have the seventh principle: respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And up until I wrote this sermon, I only thought of this as sort of a vertical concept. In my mind, the whole universe is integrated vertically in time, in this moment of time. So my example would be that at my home here in Appleton, it's going to rain, and the rain's going to run into the Fox River, which is going to run up to the Bay of Green Bay and Lake Michigan ultimately, and perhaps out the St. Lawrence Seaway to the Atlantic Ocean. Now, along the way, there's a lot of evaporation of moisture, and ultimately, something's going to evaporate and flow up into the clouds. It's going to go around the planet, and it could possibly rain on me again, the same water droplets. That's what I meant by it's all vertically integrated. Everything's neatly tied together in this biosphere. But obviously, this principle is talking about horizontally integrated across time. We receive the blessings of the interconnected universe from the past and are then also the stewards of them to pass on to the universe of the future. Blessing. And the fifth and final leading cause of life is hope. Now this is informed hope, Gunderson says, not wishful thinking. His quote is, "Optimism devoid of reality can bring us both to denial and despair." Instantly, I was thinking about President Trump's handling of the pandemic and his daily press conferences. It's very much optimistic without a lot of truth in there. Gunderson says, informed hope has a way of saying, yes, these untoward events have happened, and there's no way to turn back time, but you still have to live a life to live. Live it. We are also a people of informed hope that continue to choose life. We are a worldly religion, probably because we don't limit our source of wisdom from only ancient scriptures. We stay informed about how our faith is influenced by the current world. And yet we meet week after week, supporting each other in our hope that indeed the world can become better. Well, Gunderson uses the end of the book to pull these all together. He says the 5 causes work together, not in sequence. It feeds possibilities, it accelerates emergence, and there's a thriving as a whole ensemble. Imagine that instead of death, social decline, confusion, and separation being the focus of our attention, we concentrate in a disciplined way on seeing the life causes growing amongst us. That we focus in a disciplined way on seeing the life causes growing amongst us. This changes the trajectory of our opportunity forever. So to close, I want to give an example of all 5 causes of life coming together in something very beautiful. It's a story that involves Pillars, the umbrella organization for most of the homeless shelters in Appleton and the Fox Valley. The participants in this story are obviously very connected to each other and the situation at hand. And they seem to not be fearful. They understand the coherence of even something as bad as a pandemic. And they obviously, when you hear the story, clearly take agency and decide to do something. And their action makes me wonder if it's the result of blessings from the generations before them, but it's clearly a blessing for those to come. And in the end, it provided hope that something can be done, that we will get through this by demonstrating love and compassion. So this is a quote from Pillar's Facebook site, and I will let you know that I usually cannot get through it without beginning to tear up. Just left the Grand Chute Walmart in Appleton area. I needed to make a run for essentials for the shelter, like milk and paper products for us to use for meals, not realizing they would also be limiting nonprofits to what they buy. I was left at the checkout with a bunch of items. I could only choose one of each. Then something amazing happened. The people around me overheard me explain to the clerk that it was for the shelter and that I understood that we must limit so others can have what they need as well. Both lines on either side of me, as well as people in my checkout line, took 1 pack of each thing I had and purchased them for me. I waited with tears in my eyes as more and more people started taking these things off the conveyor belt, purchasing them and putting them in my cart before they walked out the door. Excuse me a second. Giving to the shelter without hesitation. I gained even more faith in our community today. Through all this, moments like these keep me going. Thank you to all those kind folks. And I apologize for the breakup. May we all continue to choose life in the face of all that is to come. May we support the evolvement of civilization to a better place that chooses life as well. Amen.